All right, home stretch here. Part 4 of the Workbook Getting Started mini-series brings us to day-to-day tracking of this new beautiful budget that we've built. We want to make sure that we are kind of interacting with our money every single day, recording what we're spending, really keeping good notes, because the more that you do that, and honestly, it's 2 to 5 minutes a day, tops. The more that you do that, the easier your budget closeout is going to be. At the end of the month, there's a worksheet where I'll ask you to kind of summarize where all of your money went based on category. And that can be really tedious to kind of calculate and fill out if you haven't done the work along the way. So just kind of my pro tip here, take it from somebody who's been budgeting for a long, long time, that you really want to be tracking your expenses every day. So enough chit chat there. Let's have a look at the expense trackers. So the expense tracker is where we're going to track everything that comes in and goes out of our main account, whether that's joint checking, individual checking. That's what this space is here up top, is I want you to be sure to label what account are you tracking, right? Because we know in a household budget, there are probably multiple accounts involved. You may have one for each spouse plus a joint one. And so you want to make sure that you distinguish what you're referring to. And since there are 2 sheets and there's space to label on each, you could use this sheet to track one account and this sheet to track another. If you only need a few spaces to track a little bit of activity, maybe you use credit cards for a few of your transactions, you could just block off some space down here to do that. Lots of customization that you can do here to suit your needs. Now, if you need more space than this, because you've just got this 2-page spread to last you through your budget period, if you need more space, I recommend taking like a notebook sheet of paper and kind of tucking it in here to write your additional expenses, and then you can tuck it in the back pocket, and that way you're not losing that log that you have of those expenses. Now, if we're budgeting based on when we're paid, then most likely your first transactions that you're going to list will be your paycheck. Now, let's say, again, we're kind of working with the budget that I started last time, that this paycheck has now hit my account. I'm starting this budget. And let's say I'm starting with $100 in my account. Now, I didn't budget that, so I'm going to be sure to come in here and write, hey, I didn't project that, but I did actually have a starting balance of $100. And that's what that's going to look like. So there's my starting balance. I am recording for my individual checking account. So I'm going to label that there. All right. Now my payday is the 11th. So this is what it's going to look like when we log money coming in. You're going to record it as income. And it's going to be plus 2,500. Let's say I was spot on with what I projected the amount to be. And then my new balance is going to be this 100 I started with plus this 2,500. So I have a balance now in my checking account of $2,600. This final column listed in actual is kind of a self-check system to make sure that you are going in and you are putting that particular line in your budget to say, here's what actually happened. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I log this 2,500 as, hey, that actually happened. I did actually receive that 2,500. And then I can come over here and I can check in this column to say, yes, I did put that in the actual column of my budget. I don't necessarily have bills coming out right away, but let's say right away, I go ahead and go to the grocery store that day. And maybe I spend $60 at the grocery store. I'm going to categorize that as groceries. I actually split up my categories for food into groceries and dining out. They're separate. You could kind of join them together as food, totally your preference, but I like to see how that spending differs. And so let's say that was $60 that was spent. So now we're at $25.40 in the account. So I have this transaction and this is me buying groceries. So I'm writing in pen here, and it does not make sense for me to go over here with the $60 amount and put 60 right here in pen, because I know I'm going to buy more groceries this pay cycle. It makes more sense for me to come over here and in pencil write in that I've spent $60 so far. And again, I'm doing pencil because I know I'm going to spend more on groceries this pay cycle, but I can come over here and check that off. Now, I do recommend saving earlier in the pay cycle as opposed to towards the end. Because if you wait till the end to do your emergency fund savings transfers or your savings bucket transfers, you kind of already given yourself a chance to possibly overspend and maybe be a little bit less disciplined because your account has such a high amount in it. So maybe it doesn't have to be that we transfer all $1,000 right away right now, but I think that we can handle that with this. And then maybe I'll save the savings bucket transfers for a little bit later, maybe 4 or 5 days from now in the pay cycle. I know you can't see those, but those are on page 2. And we'll just go ahead and we'll do this $1,000 emergency fund transfer. Now, let's say I do this on the 12th. So that's going to take me down to $1,540. So what we want to do here is send this money to ideally a high yield savings account, but at a minimum, a traditional savings account that maybe sits kind of in conjunction with this one at the same bank. But we want to make sure that we get this out of the checking account. We don't want this money to be sitting there in the account and kind of confusing us in terms of the money that we have to work with. So we want to get this transferred literally outside of this checking account, okay, which is why I am logging it. We're going to do an external transfer here. And again, before I move on, I want to make sure I come over and say, okay, I actually did that transfer. Now, here's the thing. And if you've got a high yield savings account, you know what I'm getting ready to describe. When you transfer so let's say she banks with Chase and she sends her money to her high yield savings account with Ally. This is not going to process instantly, okay? It's going to sit in the account for 2 to 3 business days before it actually processes out of her checking. Here is how I recommend you kind of give yourself a little note and give yourself that detail that this is pending. I recommend that you go over here in the margin, or you could even do it somewhere on this line, but you want to denote this is a pending transaction. This is your cue when you look at your expense tracker to say, okay, I'm not going to be showing $1,540 in my account. I'm going to be showing $2,540 in my account because my checking account doesn't yet know about this transaction. It hasn't processed this transaction yet. All right. And this is where you start to get into your expense tracker is the best representation of the money that you actually have to work with. I know what your checking account says. Your checking account says $2,540, but your expense tracker, the source of truth, you have $1,540 to work with because $1,000 of that account is earmarked for emergency fund savings. So your expense tracker is going to be a true representation of the money that you have to work with at any given time. I want it to be the most accurate thing that you have, which is why, using apps that kind of work in conjunction with your checking account and that sort of thing, they can kind of put you off a little bit because they're not going to have the level of accuracy that your kind of pen and paper tracking is going to have. All right. So putting in there that is pending and that tells you, hey, that hasn't come out yet. All right. Now let's say I'm going to use cash envelopes. Say this is my budget and I'm going to use cash envelopes. And let's say I want to use cash envelopes for dining out. We'll make it simple. We'll have that be the only thing that we move to a cash envelope. We'll do dining out. So I'm going to go to the ATM. This is going to be a withdrawal for $100. Okay. Again, we're early in the pay cycle. I want to have this in cash because I'm more disciplined with cash, right? Let's say that's kind of how we're proceeding here. So this is a withdrawal. Your checking account knows about this withdrawal because this money came out of checking. So that's perfectly fine. Your checking account is saying, okay, I'm right there with you. And the cash envelope is going to have its own little mini tracker in it. All right. So 99% of the time, if you purchase cash envelopes from an Etsy store, or when you purchase them from Beautiful Budget, or if you make your own, you're going to see that the typical template is going to have a little tracker that goes inside of the envelope. And that now, as soon as you have part of your budget in cash, you've kind of added a tracker. You don't have to now track your cash transactions on here. Only track them in the envelope tracker that you're going to use. Now, what I'm going to do is whenever you do a cash envelope withdrawal, I want you to leave a little bit of space and kind of resume with your tracking down here. Okay, now I've only done one envelope, so I could just leave one line and that's fine. My rule of thumb, it's a good idea for the number of envelopes that you take out, the number of envelopes that you're setting up, leave that number of blank spaces on your expense tracker. And you're going to see why. The final video, part 5 of this series, I'm going to show you how when you close out your budget and you're reconciling everything, what those blank spaces are going to be able to do for you. But for now, I'm just going to skip a space and I'm going to keep going. All right. So on the 12th, my car payment processes. Now, I skipped up here. I do need to go ahead and list this in actual, but this is a withdrawal. Okay. So to say listed in actual, we don't want to go over here and tell our budget that we actually spent $100 dining out. We may not use all of that 100. So you don't want to put the full amount of the withdrawal in here. So I want you to leave like an X here or a hyphen to say not applicable. Not applicable. I haven't actually spent anything. I've just converted it from, digital money to cash money. But this guy, I can totally do this listed in actual and come over, record it here. And now I have told my budget, hey, here's what actually happened with that car payment. If I swipe my credit card, all right, I know a lot of us use debit cards and credit cards alike when we spend money. And it's because we want to tap into those credit card points and rewards. So totally understand it. We do it in our home as well. Let's say I go and stop for gas on the 13th, categorize that as transportation. And let's say I put that $31 on my credit card. So again, I've kind of switched things up a little bit, and I need to make sure that I'm very thorough and that I give myself good notes so that all of this makes sense when I come back and look at it tomorrow or the next day. So I'm coming in here, and the pattern I'm kind of doing is that I'm logging expenses every single night before bed, for example, or every morning before I clock in at work. I'm going in and I'm recording that day's transaction or the previous day's transactions. Okay, I recommend that you do this as often as possible. Okay, daily is going to make this so much easier. If you do this every day, you don't fall behind. You don't sit down to your expense tracker looking for like, I'm 20 cents off and I don't know why, and it'll drive you mad. You won't have that problem if you're doing this every day because you're going to be so intimately familiar with what's going on that you won't miss a beat. But this was a credit card transaction. And so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put a C for credit card. That is my cue, again, that when I look at my checking account is going to see, it's only seen these other transactions that don't have a letter in the margin. Okay. It doesn't know about the other ones. So it's not going to show this amount. It's going to show this amount plus the $31 for gas, plus $1,000 from the emergency fund contribution. And it's that math that you're going to have to do to reconcile as you go. Okay. It sounds like it's like, oh my gosh, this is getting all over the place and too much number crunching. But again, when you kind of have those intricacies in your budget, like credit cards, cash envelopes, pending transactions, this is a level of detail that you want to bring to so that everything is very well explained in your tracker. And it'll become a habit, it'll become second nature, and it'll just start to click. The more and more you do it, the easier it's going to become. But that is how we want to record a credit card transaction. So let's say the next day on the 14th, I now can see that transaction on my credit card. Let's say I have a Capital One card and I can now see this transaction happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my checking account and I go ahead and make the payment. Now, there is no harm in making frequent payments to your credit card. Maybe you're making payments like every 4 to 5 days. Nothing wrong with that. All right. If you're making payments like certainly before the due date, right? So that you're not accruing interest, paying in full before the due date. And maybe you do that once a month. Okay. I don't necessarily recommend that because you're most likely not getting paid once a month. You're getting paid more often than that. So I always say at a minimum, when you are closing out your budgets, zero out your credit cards. When you are closing out your budget, you're going to want to make sure that you pay your credit card off in full. Now, depending on where your due date falls with your budget closeout, you want to make sure, obviously, that when that due date comes, that you've paid in full so that you don't start to accrue interest. So there's kind of three dates that you want to watch each month to be super on top of it. And that would be the due date. Make sure that you've paid in full by the due date. It would be paying when you're closing out one budget, paying when you're closing out another. Now that's me assuming that you have 2 budgets a month. So it's possible that you have 3 separate transactions, but that's what it takes to be very on top of it and make sure that you never accrue interest. Okay. And if we're to the point where we're accruing interest on our credit card, we're not disciplined enough to have them. That's kind of my rule of thumb. If you want to take advantage of points and rewards and miles and all that sort of stuff, that only makes sense and is a true reward when you are paying your credit card off in full every month and never accruing interest. But it's the 14th now. I'm going to go in and I'm going to pay this $31 off of my credit card. And my cue now to say I have paid it and it's pending, because that's not going to be an immediate transaction either when I go to pay this card off. But I can now take it from being a credit card transaction to being a pending transaction. So now you can kind of see where if you have this little system, and maybe it helps to kind of go up in the top and give yourself a legend. P is pending. C is credit card. And what that's kind of telling me is if it's a C, I still need to go in and pay that off the credit card when it's a C. But if it's a P, I've paid it and I'm just waiting for it to process my checking account. So let's say it is the 15th. Netflix processes just as you expected. So we'll put that in here. And we're making sure that now that I've paid this credit card payment, I'm going to go ahead and log that 31 as actual amount spent. So this is different from paid. To say that a bill is paid or a certain amount was paid, that's a little bit different. You can still list it in actual and maybe it's still pending your account. That's totally fine. Now, let's say there's an expense that we didn't anticipate. Let's say it's the 15th and you have a coworker, Jamie, who is going to be leaving the company. She's going to be moving on somewhere else to greener pastures, and she's no longer going to be working with you. And your kind of team at work is organizing like a going away for her, right? Kind of bidding her farewell, making sure, that she gets gifts and kind of feels appreciated for everything she contributed to the company, right? This happens to us all the time. And you're close to Jamie. You're like, I want to make sure that I get her a gift. You did not budget for that gift in here, but we go ahead and we get that gift. So we're going to write in here gift for Jamie. And we can just call that miscellaneous. And let's say it's a $40 gift that you get for her. So this is an unexpected expense. It's not anywhere in your budget. So we've kind of reached a point where we're filling in, column by column, we get to list it in actual, and we need to go over here, and that's kind of a one-time priority, right? It's not every day that Jamie has it going away and moves on to a different company. It's a one-time priority that you said, I would really like to get her a gift. So we can put it here and say, we didn't project anything for it, but we actually spent 40. Okay. And then we would come over here and check this off. So if you start to see that things are getting a little iffy, you might be in some hot water in terms of going over budget, well into your cushion and beyond, then we're going to cut from the bottom up. This is why you don't transfer fund money right away. You don't want to transfer fund money or anything in the luxury section at the beginning of your pay cycle, because that's the first thing to be cut if things go left. If lots of unexpected expenses come up, you're having to dip into savings buckets and things like that, you're going to cut this first. So that's kind of how this works as you upkeep your budget. You're tracking everything that's coming in and going out. One last thing I'll show is savings transfers and what that's going to look like in your expense tracker. So let's say, again, this was just a hypothetical single person's budget, but let's say this person does have a vehicle savings bucket of maybe $50, right? And she's realizing I need an oil change. Okay. So maybe it's the 17th and she's going to go ahead and go get that oil change. All the while, maybe as she's kind of sitting there and waiting for her vehicle to be worked on, she's going into her savings account, maybe her high yield savings account, and she's moving money to her checking to help cover this. Okay. And the reason I kind of have it in this order and not opposite is because with this oil change, it's probably going to be a specific amount. Let's say her oil change is $35.50. All right. And this is going to be transportation. The oil change itself is transportation. The savings transfer is income. So $916.50. Again, here we are listed in actual. And here's how I'm going to write this. I'm going to transfer the exact amount I need in to cover the oil change and no more. I have 50 in the savings bucket for vehicle, but I don't need all 50. I need 35.50. Okay. So this is going to take me right back up to 952 in my account. And again, that's probably not going to be an immediate transfer. This is going to be pending. But here's the thing. You don't want to tell your budget that, hey, you didn't anticipate that oil change, because you kind of did. You built up a vehicle savings bucket for it. So here's how I work these. I will actually go in, and this is a lot easier in the Google Sheet versus here, but I will actually go in and I will write that as if I budgeted for it the whole time. Okay, so I will come up here and I will say $35.50. I actually did transfer in $35.50, which takes care of the income. Now, maybe this is driving you crazy because you're like, well, it changes that final number. And it does. In the Google Sheet, this is going to update for you automatically. This is going to update for you automatically. And you come down here and you say oil change $35.50. And then it actually was $35.50. And this is different than telling your budget, hey, I didn't anticipate that. Because here's the thing, especially with the Google Sheet, but even with this one, when you're doing the manual addition of everything, if you're telling your budget, if there were a zero here, hey, I didn't anticipate that. I went $35.50 over in transportation. That's what your summary is going to say at the end if you put a zero here. And that's not fully true. You didn't go $35.50 over in transportation. You anticipated that oil change. You had saved up money for it. And now you're just bringing that money in to actually pay for it. And now we're good there. So all different types of things that I've kind of shown you, how to show a cash envelope withdrawal, how to show a savings transfer, pending transactions, a credit card payment that still needs to be paid off because I swiped a credit card. That could be a C. Giving yourself a little legend up here to help you understand what symbols or colors you're using is going to be important. The last thing I'll note before I close out here with the kind of budget upkeep video is the category totals at the bottom are extremely helpful with keeping track of actual spending. This is going to be actual spending by category. So you can kind of see the categories we're starting to get going here. We've got groceries. When it comes to the budget closeout that I'll show you in the next video, you can do those totals then. Because as part of that closeout, we're going to highlight our expenses by category. And that'll make it pretty quick for you to, okay, pink is groceries, and you add up all the pink and you put that total here. Debt is red, you add up all your red, put that total here. I would say that's easier to do during closeout, as opposed to doing the math every day and kind of keeping a running total at the bottom. All right, so that is the expense tracker and just kind of the day-to-day upkeep of your budget. And we will wrap up the mini series in this next video, video 5, and I'll show you how to close out pay period to pay period and also how to close out the end of month. All right, and this will be good timing because next week is the end of the month. So you'll be able to see how you can do that as you wrap up your budget. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.